We make thousands of choices every single day, but have you ever stopped to think about what's really guiding them? Today, we're going to dive into exactly that, looking at the art of choosing, based on the incredible work of Sheena Iyengar. So let's just jump right in with a pretty big question. What if that thing we hold so dear, the freedom to choose, isn't what you think it is? What if it's not as simple or even as universal as we've all been led to believe? That's what this explainer is all about. We're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at these powerful, often invisible forces, the biological drives and the cultural stories that are constantly shaping the choices we make every single day. And to really get a handle on this, our journey has to start with a deeply personal story. It's really a tale of two completely different worlds. So imagine this. Sheena Iyengar basically grew up in a country within a country. At home, she's being raised by Sikh immigrants. This meant living by some really strict religious rules. We're talking uncut hair, a steel bracelet, special undergarments. The whole culture was built around obedience and what the family wanted. But then she walks out the door and goes to her American public school, and what does she hear? The exact opposite. The message there is that making your own decisions is the only thing that's right and natural. And to make this already massive conflict even more complicated, she was diagnosed with a degenerative eye disease that would eventually lead to total blindness, putting yet another constraint on her world. So, how do you even begin to make sense of a life like that? As she puts it herself, she had a few options. She could have seen her life as just destiny, already written out for her. Or she could have seen it as a bunch of random, terrible accidents. But she didn't pick either of those. Instead, she chose a third story. A much more promising one, to look at her life through the lens of choice, to focus on what was still possible and what she could make happen. And her story, it really brings us to a fundamental question, doesn't it? Where does this incredibly powerful drive to choose even come from? Well, it turns out it starts with something psychologists call the illusion of control. Okay, so at the absolute core of this is a concept called perceived control. And the key thing to get here is that it's not about how many choices you actually have. It's about your belief that you can influence your life. How much control you feel you have, well, as we're about to see, that can literally be a matter of life and death. All right, let's look at a classic and honestly pretty unsettling experiment from the 1950s. A researcher put some rats in jars of water they couldn't get out of. The first group had no reason to believe they could escape, and they gave up. They swam for about 15 minutes, and that was it. But the second group? They were different. Before going in the jars, the researcher handled them and let them wriggle free for a moment, just gave them a little taste of escape. So what do you think happened when that second group was put into the same inescapable jars? Get this. They swam, on average, for 60 hours. Not 60 minutes, 60 hours. It's unbelievable, right? And why? Simply because that brief earlier experience gave them the belief that escape was possible. Just the perception of control totally transformed their physical endurance. But this perception of control, it has a dark twin, and that's something called learned helplessness. There's another famous study by Martin Seligman. He had two groups of dogs, and they were getting mild shocks. One group could actually stop the shocks just by pressing a panel. The other group, they had no control at all. Then he moved both groups into a new box where all they had to do to escape was jump over a low wall. Super easy. Now, the dogs who had control before, they figured it out right away and jumped to safety, no problem. But the dogs from the other group, a full 2/3 of them just lay there. They didn't even try to escape. They had learned to be helpless. That belief, that feeling, it completely paralyzed them, even when freedom was right there, just a small hop away. It shows you that the perception of no control is just as powerful. Okay. So this biological drive for control seems to be universal, right? It's baked into us. But how we express it and where we look to find that feeling of control, well, that's shaped by something else entirely, and that's our cultural script. Take a look at this. This is a photo of Sheena Iyengar's parents on their wedding day. Now, for them, every single detail, what they wore, who they married, all of it was decided for them by their families. They were following a script that was thousands of years old. And here's the part that's probably most shocking to a lot of us. They met for the very first time on this day. How do we even begin to wrap our heads around that? Well, this brings us to the two fundamental scripts that societies give us for making choices. On one hand, you have individualist cultures, like in the US. Here, the focus is all on the I. It's about what you want, your personal preferences. On the other hand, you have collectivist cultures, common in places like Asia, Africa, and South America. And there, the focus shifts to the we. It's all about group harmony and doing your duty. You can really see that individualist ideal perfectly captured by the philosopher John Stuart Mill. He said the only freedom deserving the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, right? The ultimate goal is self-expression. Now, let's contrast that with this Japanese proverb, makeru ga kachi. It means to lose is to win. Think about that for a second. The idea here is that getting your own way isn't the most important thing. What's more important is maintaining the harmony of the group. Sometimes a personal loss can actually be a victory for everyone. So, okay, these are fascinating ideas, but how do these different scripts actually play out in the real world? Well, there's a really surprising experiment that shows us the difference between my choice and our choice. So in this really clever study, Iyengar and her colleague Mark Lepper gave some anagram puzzles, word games, to a bunch of 7 to 9-year-old kids. They split them into groups. Group 1 got to choose their own puzzle category. For Group 2, a stranger, the experimenter, chose for them. And for the third group, they were told that their own mother had chosen their puzzle for them. And the results? They were absolutely fascinating. Just look at this. The Anglo-American kids, they performed best, by a huge margin, when they got to choose the puzzle themselves. If anyone else chose, their motivation just tanked. But for the Asian American kids, it was the complete opposite. They performed their absolute best when they thought their moms had chosen for them. Get this, they did even better than when they picked the puzzle themselves. And honestly, nothing captures this better than what one of the kids, a Japanese-American girl named Natsumi, said to the experimenter afterwards. She asked, "Could you please tell my mommy that I did it just like she said?" She wasn't upset that her mom chose for her. She was proud. Her question just shows this entirely different source of motivation, right? It's about fulfilling the wishes of someone you trust and seeing their choice as part of your own. So, where does this leave us? What does all this actually mean? Well, it means we have to start thinking not just about what we're choosing, but how we're choosing in the first place. And here's the big takeaway. The whole idea of choice that many of us have, this deeply personal, individual thing we do, it's not some universal truth written in stone. It's a story. It's a narrative, a script that we learn from our culture. And it turns out, different cultures tell very, very different stories about it. It reminds me of what the writer Joan Didion famously said. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. And these stories we tell about choice, whether they're all about the I or all about the we, they're what give our lives meaning and structure. They're how we make sense of the world around us. And that really leaves us with one final, powerful question to think about. If the very nature of choice is a story we learn and then tell ourselves over and over, what story will you choose to live by?